to put some emphasis on the transition from being a restaurant owner, small business owner, to then becoming a full-time real estate investor. I mean, we have many people on our show who left their W-2 jobs or left their careers, but particularly the restaurant business. I mean, I used to own a restaurant years ago with my dad, so I totally understand the process. But the restaurant business itself, it gets immersed in your life. It becomes part of your life. You know, you're dependent on the income, you're dependent on the success of the business, but then also you have employees and others who are dependent on that business as well. So that transition, in my opinion, is much more difficult than just leaving a job or leaving a career. You know, you're leaving your baby, something you've worked so hard. And also, kind of on that restaurant topic, there's somewhat of a you know, cultural dogma that exists. You know, people saying, "Hey, Gino, stick to your lane. You know, this is what you're doing. This is your business. What are you doing? Real estate investing, educating." So you know, talk to us about this, the transition a bit more, and the anxiety that exists. So I'm sure a lot of people are stuck at a job that they're not happy with, or in a business that they know there's something greater within themselves. That's something that we both went through, even though we were real estate professionals who's continued in the real estate business, but in a different type of aspect of it. But talk to us about that transition and the anxiety and what people said to you and the whole process, please.
Let me start out with a quick joke for both of you. How do you make $1 million in the restaurant business?
Not
I
sure.
don't know.
Start out with 2 million.
Oh gosh.
It is a hard business. And the one thing that I learned in the restaurant business was when people complain to me and say, "Oh, I worked an 8-hour day," or "I worked 10 hours." And well, work when it's 105 degrees in the kitchen and you have 7 people screaming at you and you've got to learn another language and people can't wait 6 minutes for the lasagna because they get a package overnight. It's all about instant gratification and all of that pressure, and then working all week and you're the owner and not getting paid. Everyone else gets paid and you don't. There's pain in that, right? And for me, I didn't understand how to scale that business. And it was hard because I was taught by my father. There's a saying in Italian, I don't really share this often. It goes this way: l'occhio del padrone ingrassa il cavallo. What that means in Italian is the eye of the owner fattens the horse. So what my dad meant by that is you need to be there, you need to breathe it, live it, die it. So how did I interpret that? Well, I've got to be in the kitchen. I have to send out every dish. I've got to wash the plates, and I'm there. There's no system building. Right. For me, once I transitioned into real estate, I had a different paradigm. People see the world as they are. That's how I saw it. Now, not as it is. How is, you know, Bezos building this $1 trillion company? I mean, he's not much smarter than the two of us are. He has just different skills and different thought and mindset based upon business that I didn't learn up until a few years ago. Most of us have these limiting beliefs and these assumptions that hold us back. And I had that. And when I started buying multifamily, I was still the pizza guy. Jake's the 𝗖𝗣𝗜, I'm the pizza guy. He was selling pharmaceuticals and I was stuck with the apron and the chef coat. And that's the important thing for everybody. It's about your identity. Once I started identifying as a multifamily investor, once I started identifying as Gino from Jake and Gino and writing books and getting on podcasts and all of a sudden the identity shifted and I started doing things that a multifamily investor does. What does that mean? I started talking to brokers. I started doing property tours. I started underwriting deals. I started networking. These are things that a multifamily investor does. Not what a restaurant person does. So once you adapt that identity, people who quit smoking, they don't stop smoking. They are non-smokers. They don't even have that vocabulary anymore. So, and it's very hard for a lot of us to adopt that. And it's a slow process, really working on, you know, personal development, getting some life coaching, figuring out what your why is. My why ultimately wasn't for multifamily, believe it or not. My why was to create an amazing business with a family-like atmosphere where I could lean on my employees. My employees would love to come and work there, because for years at the restaurant, I didn't like my job anymore. So at Jake and Gino, my team loves to work there. We love to empower, we love to motivate people, and I want to be a role model to my children. I don't want my kids seeing me come home after 12 hours, cursing about the job, cursing about the employees, not getting paid enough, and just being grumpy, as they would say. I didn't want that. So what vehicle am I going to find? For me, it was multifamily. And then multifamily led me into the education space, led me into the syndication space, into the property management space. We call it multifaceted. We're even selling whole life insurance for real estate investors. So from that one business has spawned multiple businesses, but you got to start with the 125 crappy little property that we did. And from there, There's the vision. So for me, it is about identity. It's about setting goals. James Clear's got a great book. The book is called Atomic Habits. I think everybody should read the book. It's an amazing book. It talks about goals. We all look at the goals as the result, right? That's the result, what happened. But don't fall in love with the result. Fall in love with the system or the process that you're going to get there. How are you going to get your first deal? Well, set up a system or process to do that. Underwrite 100 deals. Call the brokers, do property tours, and then reverse engineer that. If you're underwriting 2 deals a week, and you've got to, you got to look at 100 deals, it's going to take you 50 weeks to get that first deal. Figure out what the system is, fall in love with that system, and then replicate it. But then ultimately, like you said, bringing back to your question, it's all about your identity. If you're identifying as the pizza guy in the kitchen, you're not going to become the multifamily investor. And that's very hard for people out there to understand. And it was hard for me because at a certain point, I'm like, am I having the imposter syndrome? Am I going out there? And everybody listening to this, we all start at ground zero. You look at us, the three of us right now, we've had experience in this space. We've been doing it for years, but we all started from nothing. I started from a fourplex and I built that up. Having the partnerships and the accountability and the community has really helped me to continue having that support group and that proximity. 5 people around you. Everyone says that proximity is key. And the last thing I'll say about this is your language becomes your experience. If the language of positivity or the language of financial intelligence is not there, if you can't speak the lingo, then you're not going to be part of the lingo. Sharon Lechter was on our podcast talking about that and saying, hey, I've written these books because I want to empower people to speak the financial intelligence, the financial language. If you don't know what a cap rate is, if you don't know what a cash on cash return is, if you don't know what a C property is, then you're not a multifamily investor. That's the bottom line. And it's the same thing in any space. So know the language, and your language becomes your experience. When you talk to yourself, how are you talking to yourself? How are you presenting yourself? Where's the energy in your life? If you have no energy and no passion and no desire, it all goes out the window. So you have to check yourself, check where your identity is, and watch what language you use around yourself and around your others, and especially in your own mind.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely, 100%. And also that
Complete
identity,
sense.
just to add on that a bit, there's preconceived limitations that a pizza guy, identity has, whereas a real estate investor doesn't. So there is a mindset that's there. There is kind of the concept of immersion and surrounding yourself from everyone, eat, live, sleep, this concept of whatever business it be, the student of the game. And we're going to get into those.
I'll give you a quick story on that. It was on our second deal. Jake and I had done our first deal. It was our second deal. I'm in the kitchen. I walk outside. I sit in the front, and a gentleman walks in. His name is Mike. Good customer of ours. I'm like, this guy's driving a nice car. He's always dressed well. He comes around 5 o'clock to take food out. And I start speaking to him. And like, Mike, what do you do for a living? He was a hedge fund trader at the time. And I'm like, and he's asking me, and we're talking about China and oil and gold and the economy and inflation. And he looked at me as the pizza guy. And he's like, oh man, you really know what you're talking about, this stuff. I said, yeah, I'm looking into multifamily. I bought a 25 unit. I'm buying a 36 unit. Now, Mike at the time was buying single family homes. So he's like, you know what? Give me a call. Let me look at what you're, looking at. Called him up a week later. Long story short, he invested on the second deal, partnered up on the second deal. His balance sheet was strong. So on the third deal, no problem. And since then, he's been our partner with me and Jake since our third deal, all the way scaling up. And that's just to say that if I had identified as the pizza guy and I hadn't come out of my shell and I hadn't spoken about Mike, about the value that I have, I wouldn't be having this conversation right now, because people say, oh, where am I going to get the money? Where am I going to get the time? Well, Mike was that lever for me. And I actually provided value to Mike because he's buying $3 million single family homes up in New York and Connecticut for $10,000 a month in rent. Do those numbers make sense? No. So when he saw that value, it's like game over. Okay. But at the same time, if I had sat there and not spoken to him and not engaged, I wouldn't have been able to provide value to him. So that's what I'm talking about with the identity. Don't be afraid. What's the worst thing that can happen? That conversation's over. I never speak to Mike all over again. But when God opens up a door, you have to go through that door. You have to be present and say, what am I going to do? Was I lucky that day? Probably. But was I working hard? Yes. So the harder you work, the luckier you get and the more opportunities that present themselves to you. That to me is what it comes down to. We all need a little bit of luck, but without hard work, luck ain't going to get you nowhere.
And luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
That's right. I love that. Excellent. Preparation meets opportunity equals luck. You should trademark that.
All right.